All right, so the first thing I want to do is just go through a little housekeeping, because Maya pointed out to me, which was something I was aware of, but I hadn't figured out how to deal with it. So your signature assignment, which you are creating that one slide that's 10 minutes maximum, you can hand that in to me whenever you're ready. I'm not going to push on that. You don't have to hand that in when this course finishes. You can hand it in when you're ready. And when you do, I'll swap it for the certificate, right? One of the other parts of that assignment was looking at a community-run conservation initiative and linking it to a video that another student had done. Now, obviously, when are you going to do that if people are handing it in when they're ready? So the thing is, the whole point of this course is to make you think. So what I'd like to suggest is sort of maybe 3 weeks or a month after the end of this course, we meet again for a final meet, just to talk about things and where you've come to in your thinking. And if you would like to take on that challenge, then you are welcome to present to the class. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Maya's clapping away.
Same
All right.
yeah, Maya's clapping.
Yeah. All right. I think that was the only bit of housekeeping. I know there was something that Ricky wanted to discuss, so we'll wait until he comes on to talk about that. But otherwise, is there anything from the learning that other people are feeling like they want to ask me a few questions or discuss a few things before we get going?
So I really liked the that 6D. I'll get the actual term, but so is that, you know, are there other tools like that that are used? Does, you know, that maybe like the 6D doesn't work as well, or like, is there a way to maybe some research or something to look into just to learn more about it?
No, not really. It's very difficult. This is the part where we just don't have interdisciplinary conservation being done with working with communities. Now, the 6D measure of cultures is very much used in a business sense. There's very few, if I know, I don't know really one person who's tried to use the 6D. But also you've got to think about the 6D as a form of a culture within a culture. So for example, we spoke about the Ijara tribe in northern Kenya. You know, the Ijara are very different to Kenya as a whole. So you would redo the whole 6D measurement for the Ijara tribe. So yes, there's talk about using these. And I think, you know, I find them incredibly useful, especially when I'm looking at why is an initiative not working. You know, you look at what they have set up and measure that against what you're seeing on the scale and say, okay, you know what your end objective is. 5 ways to get there are going to be correct. The 6th way will be wrong. So let's try and change the way you're approaching something because this culture is exhibiting these signs, right? So I think all sorts of personality, but not so much personality. I think that comes into it when you're assessing your team members. But I think it's an incredibly helpful tool if used in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I wish we used it at work.
Yeah, but in terms of extra reading, I can't, and that's actually what also Ricky wanted to learn more about, the interconnected linkages, you know,
Yeah.
facets. And there's so much stuff out there. And in terms of specific extra reading, you know, I can't suggest anything, but what I do know is that with the rest of this course, we are going to be going into a lot more depth with the linkages. So with that 6D culture measurement, keep all those linkages in mind and keep that measurement in mind and see where that takes you. Because Katrina, you were also very interested in the Reiki, or was it Lisa?
No, I actually thought that was pretty interesting myself. and everything. And then I got this in the,
Yeah.
love it. I haven't started reading it yet, but I got it the other day. I got it yesterday. So, but no, the Reiki was interesting to me as well, because I just, you know, it's just interesting to me because, you know, one of the parts of the Reiki is, what was it? The accountability. And I think that's so huge because there are so many people that are just not accountable for their actions or what it is that they're supposed to do. And it's really frustrating.
Or we have the wrong person accountable for the wrong.
Right. Yeah. And so that was interesting to me as well. And stuff. I like hearing, and I haven't gotten through all the lectures yet this week, but the ones I have, it's very interesting to me. And I just think about it and I'm like, God, I wish we used some of this at work. Probably make certain days at work go a lot easier because there's always, we like to say too many.
For the dish cleaner.
So, yeah.
Okay, cool. And
Well, actually, I think that's a good point because this is basically just management strategies. So I think you can probably glean quite a bit just from looking at management strategies for offices. Yeah. It's all just managing people and personalities.
Yep.
Exactly. So these things are not like, we don't need to reinvent the wheel for conservation. Yeah. Things are already there, you know.
Yeah. I noticed how much it is similar to what I learned about the modern agile method of software development, because that is based on self-sufficient teams. And so you try to build up a team where you have all the knowledge and all the information present in one of the members so that they can work together by themselves and that they don't need too much input from outside. And I think there's a lot of strategies already there that could be used for at least some of the roles that you need in community conservation as well.
Absolutely, yes. So, yeah. Sharon, Ines, do you have anything you want to add or ask? All right, I'm going to share my screen then for our complex scenario this week. And I am going to read it out for this moment. So all of these complex scenarios are based on real situations. So people I know or places I've worked or things I've come across. So this was Uganda. So Chugga, who lives in Uganda, loses his goats often to hyena and leopard. The nearby lodge has a compensation scheme set up for such losses. But before they will part with the money, they do a site inspection. So when you do a site inspection, someone comes to you and says, okay, we've had a goat or a sheep killed by a predator, and they'll usually name the predator. Now you go into the community and you assess that carcass. You need to look for tracks all around the carcass to tell you which predator it was, because quite potentially, in fact, very often, you will find community members saying it's a leopard and it's actually feral dogs, because there are so many unvaccinated, unspayed dogs that are killing livestock, and people simply won't accept it. So they rather blame it on hyena and leopard. And then you have to see how have they made the kill. And all of you did the endangered and priority species. So, you know, how do animals leave a kill? A lion will eat the haunches. A cheetah will take out the intestines and leave them on the side. Hyena will even crunch the bones, you know. So you've got to look at this carcass and say, really, who do you think killed it? And that is like a crime scene investigation. That's checking what bite marks, where the bite marks are. Was it at the throat? Was it on the haunches? What are the tracks all around? And then you weigh the carcass and you see what age it was, and then you decide on the compensation. So following that inspection, you do usually take the carcass away. So is that actually fair? Because that's their carcass killed by whatever it was, but surely it's fair that they can go and eat it. The thing is, there isn't enough of a system where you can trust that that's what they're going to do, because very often they lace it with poison and put it out as bait. So you need to get that carcass out and burn it. So the discussion then, do you think that a farmer or a livestock herder should be reimbursed if stock is lost? So does the compensation scheme work? And if it's going to work, who pays for that? Is it government? Is it landowners? Is it the lodge? Is it tourists? And how do you actually ensure truth? And can any of you, or have any of you come across a compensation scheme which has been successful? And how can we deal with stock loss in wildlife buffer zones, which are usually community areas? So, you know, it's in the interest of a protected area to have a buffer zone. And if that buffer zone are rural communities, great, that's a good buffer zone. In Uganda, they are using tea plantations as a buffer zone because a lot of animals don't want to come and eat into the tea plantations. There's no cover, and also they don't eat tea. So let's open up the discussion then. Who has crossed a compensation? Yes, Lisa, go for it.
Real quick, does somebody have a TV or something on in the background? Like, I'm just getting so much ambient noise that it's really distracting. Does anybody
Okay.
have something going on?
I hear it too.
It's actually mine, but hold on, I'm going to put me on
Oh,
now, but I'm in the hotel.
oh, so it's people talking.
Hold on. How do I go on silent now? Yeah.
Wow, I guess that worked, I guess, but
That worked. So I think, so, okay, so one of the questions was, is the compensation, you know, a good, good to use? And I think that that's, you know, one of those lovely answers of it depends, because I think it really depends on, you know, where you're at and how much the livestock are being lost. You know, if there's where it's happening a lot, then, you know, the compensation is not going to work. So because you're constantly having to go in and investigate, you know, how that animal died. And so then perhaps it's time to start thinking of a different tool that can be used, whether it's livestock guard dogs or, and so for, I'm not aware of any, you know, that have been done myself, but I do think that it is dependent because you asked, how do you keep them honest? And I think that's a tough question because once, you know, like you mentioned, if you leave the carcass with them, they'll probably lace it with poison. And that's just based on, you know, things that have happened in the past. And so that is a tough question to say, well, how do you keep them honest? So is it, you know, and again, you can't be checking up on them all the time. She's walking. Hi. And so, yeah, I think that that's really a tough question because I don't really know how you could keep them honest without it costing more money, whether it was to the government or the community or the, you know, where it's happening, because you would need to kind of be checking up on them, so to speak. And, you know, unless you were sitting there watching them cook and eat that carcass, I don't really know how you could keep them honest. So that's an interesting question to explore.
Well, I think that perhaps you need to put some guidelines in place and some rules in place before you consider compensation. So perhaps there's something like they need to go through a certain type of training or something with whoever to talk about BOMAs and talk about, you know, mitigating chances of predator attacks and things like that, and maybe pass some sort of basic rules of how they're managing their livestock before they're even eligible for any compensation if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And part of that would be taking the carcass afterwards for investigation.
Let's talk about what are the types of dishonesty that you come across. Can anyone name any of these?
What was the?
Can you repeat the question, please?
What types of dishonesty do you come across?
Well, they could lie, like you said, about how the animal was killed. which is why you guys have to do the investigation. So, I mean, that's very common. They could see a wild dog or a feral dog actually kill their goat and still contact you and say, you know, it was a hyena or a leopard. So I think that is definitely something they could lie about, because they're thinking about, oh, we can get the money and stuff. But that's why you guys, or that's why they have the policy in place to investigate, to make a determination if it was a hyena or a leopard.
Absolutely. And then you also very commonly get people from other communities bringing in their goat or sheep to pretend it was killed in the community that gets compensation. So how are you going to do that? Because if you're going to put them through training, like you said, you can't put every single community through training, right? So how do you put your community through training that deals with a certain type of dishonesty, but you've provided the money. So that's the honeypot. So anyone's going to lie to get money if they want it. You know, it doesn't matter where in the world you are. So now you've got a community member from a community 25 kilometers away comes with his dead goat on the back of his bicycle to put it in a special, you know, specific place in the community that's getting compensation. So how do you deal with that?
I think in Switzerland, we also have compensations for wolf and bear killings. And one of the solutions is that all cattle and sheep and goats have to be chipped or branded, so you know whose it is. And there are inspections when someone has been killed. And I think the word neglecting is a key word as well, because in Switzerland we have herds that are just in the mountains for the whole summer, and they fall down the rocks. And so someone can pretend it was the wolf killing the sheep. So they have the inspections, and I think that's a very good key to less pretending. And as I said, the chips and brands.
Yeah, and definitely virtual fences are also part of that people have virtual fences so the chipped animal can't cross out of that virtual fence because an alarm goes off.
Is there, I mean, what about like not a 3 strikes you're out, but you know, we catch you lying, then we're no longer gonna compensate you. Although I guess then they could have their goat, somebody else could pretend it's theirs, so that probably wouldn't work. Never mind.
And also there's the sense of, you know, how do you prove who it is, in that people will come to you. You don't know every single member personally. So they borrow each other's ID cards, pose as someone else. So you don't know who this person is every single time.
Is this could you maybe, like in other parts, when you're recruiting your team, can you do sort of a self-policing situation where you have people within the communities that sort of self-police by, you know, informing you or et cetera, to sort of keep you honest or keep other community members from, or other communities from coming in and taking advantage?
Absolutely. So you've really got to self-police, and you've got to get communities to do that in the most creative ways possible. But, and we'll come back to self-policing and ways to do that. But this is all in the fact that we're assuming compensation schemes work. So let's go back to basics and say, does a compensation scheme actually work before we decide how we're going to make this scheme honest?
I think you could maybe use the scheme to make the situation more secure for the people that are herding their stock, so that you say, okay, you only get compensation if you have some certain rules in place, and then you could use it maybe to get more farmers or more stock herders to actually have at least some kind of security from predation present, so that you use it as an intermediate step to get them better?
Yes, so intermediate step is a critical question, but what about bargaining power, which is what you're meaning, Cornelia? So either you're bargaining on the number of livestock, or what about bargaining on vaccination and feral dog neutering programs? Like, they can only get compensation if they can prove every one of their dogs is neutered or, you know, is vaccinated, and you're going to have to work with veterinary departments or government schemes to provide that. So that's something you could do. Any other suggestions?
Herding dogs.
And those are very much used, and in fact, more than that, used out here are herding donkeys.
Mhm.
Donkeys will, if they're raised with whatever animal it is, they will identify with that animal, but they're extremely aggressive to attackers, whether it's human, lion, eagle. Those donkeys will go in and they will kill. They bite and they kick pretty severely. So training, you know, and donkeys are quite a cheap way to protect your herds. So it is something you could do.
Are in that particular situation, are donkeys preferred over the livestock guard dogs because of their, okay.
I mean, one thing that has changed that is, I don't know how much you guys have heard of this massive push on Africa from the Chinese for our donkeys. So donkey slaughterhouses have been opened up all over Africa, and there's been a massive push to use the donkey skins for some Chinese medicine, and it's quite horrific. There are a lot of countries that have started to close down the slaughterhouses because of theft. People losing their donkeys meant they lost livelihoods. The conditions were horrific. I mean, anyway, I'm not even going to go into that. But so things with donkeys are a little bit altered because of that. But because a lot of countries are now shutting down the slaughterhouses, things are going back to, you know, but to leave a donkey out with your herd meant it was going to be stolen and slaughtered.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago when I went to see cheetah conservation, we had met with some of the farmers, and you know, we talked with them about you know, some of them had livestock guard dogs, some of them didn't, some of them had donkeys. And I that was the first time I had heard, I didn't realize that donkeys could be used for but it made sense because they can be very loud, and which that in and of itself can spook a predator. But I thought it was interesting because this one particular farmer, he had 4 donkeys and stuff that he would put out the way he would rotate his livestock. So he would have you know, a donkey with each group.
Yeah, and in South America, they use llamas a lot. So that's, you know, in replace for a donkey. And actually, there are some places in Africa that use llamas that are imported.
Okay, question. I don't know a lot about llamas, but what is it that makes them unique for that? Just curious.
They're very defensive. So along with donkeys, that group of animals is very defensive. They won't just stand by and watch something being killed. So they will bite and kick and go in and attack. So that's what you want, right? And what a livestock herding dog does, it goes in and attacks.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay, so has anybody come across a compensation scheme that actually works? Guys, give me 2 minutes. I'm going to just go downstairs. Okay.
Okay.
You guys keep discussing.
And we were a little quiet on that question. I don't know of any.
Well, it seems like direct compensation, I can't seem to find any examples of where that works, but I think there has been some success in a different type of compensation, which seems like it's almost like creating a job. Like, I don't know if it was in this class, like about the lion guardians in
Yeah.
Abicelli.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you basically enlist them to do a job. And so you're kind of consistently paying them, and their job is, tracking and sort of protecting protecting livestock from lions. So maybe that's a sort of a way to do it without livestock, maybe.
No, you're exactly right. It's a very good way. And, in most cases, one of the things that is, I guess, what are the driving forces and the underlying factors? But is that if you're losing livestock, you're losing your livelihood, you're losing an ability to have money. But if you are now paid to be a guardian, not only do you have a job, so your social standing increases, but also you have the ability to maintain the property that you do own, which is the livestock, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because in Malawi, they found that people loved having a uniform. So if you were giving them a job and they had a uniform, they took it very seriously. So it's interesting that something as simple as a uniform could kind of give them the, I don't know, incentive they need.
Exactly. No, you're right. And that, I think you'll come across that in one of the knowledge modules. Like I'm not sure where everyone's at or which knowledge module it's in, but it does, what are the ways to introduce volunteers out of their job? And uniforms are really important. So, okay, so do you really think that farmers should be reimbursed if their stock is lost? And when you say farmers, let's say you've got two different types. You've got the guy who was there ever since time immemorial, his family's owned the land, he's got stock. But what about now that some developer buys that land and sells it to quite rich people who want a housing estate there or a hobby farm? And now they're losing stock to, you think about it in America with a mountain lion, but really they're pretty well off and they've decided to live in that area. They've moved there, they've built. So when you say, should a farmer be reimbursed, which farmer now?
Mhm.
Good question. Well, I think maybe this kind of ties on to what Lisa was saying earlier, that if you choose to move into these areas, prior to, you need to be educated on what it is that you're, what you're getting yourself, what you're getting yourselves into, but also what you need to do. I had some friends, they just moved into a home up into the mountains. They're not farmers or anything, but I was telling them things that they needed to do that they, would do at their house down closer in the city, and, hanging bird feeders and all of these things. And I would tell them, don't do that. And sure enough, they did. And sure enough, bears taking them down. And, the trash, don't just roll your trash out. And every time they wouldn't listen to me, they would come home and the trash would be everywhere. And so even with them, I was trying to educate them and they still didn't, do what they needed to. But I was like, okay, you're part of the problem because you're not doing what you need to do. And there's so much information to learn how to live in those environments. And so, they can't say that they didn't know when they did. And so I think that's part of it, that if you have a farmer or, that moves into an area and they've been educated and they are having issues, then, okay, well, you're obviously not doing, or, you didn't listen to what you need to do. And then that's when you work with that farmer. And if they continue to have issues, then they're probably not doing what they've been told. And in that situation, then they don't get compensated because, you've given. So I think those that choose to move into those areas need to really understand what they're getting themselves into. Because I mean, in Colorado, we have mountain lions, we have bobcats, we have, black bear population. And we actually just recently had some wolves spotted, and they're actually wanting to reintroduce wolves. And so, we have several predators in the state. It's just like camping. We have to take certain precautions when we go camping. So to me, it's the same thing. If you go camping without a bear canister, well, then you're just asking for trouble, and you're training a bear to, go investigate campers and stuff. So
I don't know. I feel like the problem with that is putting wild animals above people. And, I'm in LA, and we have mountain lions here as well. And I absolutely hate this sort of law, but exists, is people that I live in the mountains where there's mountain lions, and people that do and have llamas and stuff, for example, if anything attacks your livestock, you can get a permit to shoot the lion, and they're endangered in LA, and it doesn't matter. And, this was a huge controversy a couple of years ago, because someone had a terrible boma for their llama, and a lion came in and killed a bunch of their llamas, so they did know better. But, I think it's crappy, but I think it's that people before animals situation, which I think is very common in a lot of these conservation initiatives.
yeah, it is, because the people don't, the people are like, well, why should the animal get priority? I do hear that a lot. That's been happening a lot since they started the process of wanting to reintroduce wolves, and having that on the ballot and stuff, and where the farmers just were ticked, and they're like, it's like, well, no, you can't. But that's why they have several, they're not just relying on the voters, and they would have meetings and things like that. So yeah, it's
well,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and also a few weeks ago, a mountain lion went in someone's yard and attacked a 5-year-old kid. The mom managed to rescue the kid, but then, they immediately killed the lion.
I heard about that.
I think it happens in Africa as well. When there's a man eater, I think they generally kill it. So,
well, I can give you an example just in Nakuru National Park, where we had 2 rangers killed by lion. And they went out and shot 3 lions, but, and here we go, is the crux of the matter. The ranger were walking from the pub to their homes, which are inside the park, can you believe? And they were both drunk, completely and utterly drunk. So of course those lions are going to take someone out who's, not listening to the rules. You do not walk at night, full stop. They were walking at night. It was like past midnight as well. It was kind of 1 a.m. Number 2, the pub shouldn't have been open at that time, because it's for weekends, rangers off duty. And number 3, it's inside the park, and you're choosing to do that drunk. So, it's kind of tough luck, but you can't have that kind of tough luck, because humans always come first.
Yeah, but that's like natural selection.
Well, I mean, this just happened. I was talking to this professor about his project in the Mara, and it was a lion project, and it was going great until this lion killed 3 kids. But turns out that the Maasai sent these kids out at 10 o'clock at night to find cattle. So of course they got killed by lions. So it's, again, people.
That comes into the lying, because they know that if they tell the truth, they're not going to get any press coverage or anything like that. So then it changes its story so much so that no one knows what the truth is. And therefore, your compensation, you're paying for people to lie. Pretty much you're giving an incentive to people to lie.
Yeah, you can't protect people from themselves, it seems.
Very true.
Okay, so Cornelia said a transitionary stage. So I have seen wildlife compensation work as a transitionary stage. This is when you state your limitations as an NGO or as an outside entity, where you say, okay, we can have 3 months where we're getting sorted, where we're figuring out what's going on, where this might work, right? Has anybody come across that, where it's been an interphase, what do you say? A phase that happens between all other planning? Nothing in the US or Switzerland or France?
You know, I haven't read up recently on the introduction back into Colorado, so I'll have to read up again on that and see where they're at currently.
I know it's a huge issue in Wisconsin when they reintroduced the wolves, and because they were going to have a hunting quota, and then they put a moratorium on the hunting. So then the population did explode, and then the hunters were just pissed. And so it's just been this back and forth kind of nightmare. And now there's more conflict because there's more wolves.
Well, and you do hear a lot about, you know, there are people that are very happy with, you know, when they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone, but then there are other people that are not happy with the amount of wolves that are in the area. So you kind of hear, you know, you're hearing both sides.
Well, because hunters are pissed about it because the wolves are getting a lot of the deer and stuff that they want to hunt. So it takes those numbers down and there's less for them to hunt.
Yeah.
But like Yellowstone, actually, it made tourism a year-round thing because the wolves brought tourists to Yellowstone. So it's supporting businesses that weren't able to go year-round before. It's our own naughty issue in the US.
Yeah.
And the wolves do, we have the same issue in Yellowstone with farms that border it and the wolves and them eating the cattle and stuff on the local farms. But I don't know what the scheme is if they do. It's a good question. I'm always looking at Africa.
You know,
I mean, a lot of these are brought across from the Western world. Sorry, who was saying that?
I was saying in Switzerland we have schemes and they are made by the government and nature organizations. So it's a sort of common sense. And we have wolves, the populations are growing. Not everyone is happy. It's the same as you say, the hunters are not happy, but they cannot shoot the wolves until they have killed a certain number of animals. And when they have killed maybe, I don't know precisely, maybe 8 goats or cattle or something, they are free to hunt, but only maybe 2 young males of one pride or group or whatever you say with wolves. So the rules are very, very correct or laid out very strictly. And from the government at the end. And they also pay for dead sheep and so.
Okay, so, you know, we come back to 2 things here for me. The first is the mantra you've heard that the best conservationist is an ex-hunter poacher, you know, someone who's been in the field. So if we were, and the same would be in America, right, or wherever, is that the perception that the wolves are killing all of the prey that the hunters want, is that actually true or is it a perception? And that's why data collection by the community itself. So you say to the hunting group and you say, okay, this is what you think is happening. So go out and get some data and prove it. We'll help you to collect that data. We'll help you set up a plan, you know, with your camera traps, with this, counting the number of prey species. And then tell us if it's actually true, because most of the time a perception is wrong, right? So that's one thing there. The next thing is that if you are going to pay compensation, then you have to have barriers. Like if you're paying taxes, if you pay this much, if you earn this much in wages, you pay this much in taxes. If, right? So you need social, economic sort of, not barriers is not the word I'm looking for, but to say, okay, so if you own more than 50 sheep, your compensation is going to be more. I mean, it's going to be less than if you own 4 sheep, right? But you've also got to prove that you've gone through some sort of training, or that you've got documented evidence of your BOMA, right? Now, everyone has a mobile phone, so you could take a photo of the BOMAs, but that needs to be on a monthly basis. Or you have self-policing, so you have somebody within the communities who's going to check all the BOMAs and check that they're built properly, right? So these are all ways that you can do this. Any other ideas? God, this hotel is so busy tonight. Do you know what? The rugby is on, so everyone's watching rugby. And I tell you what, I don't know where I can go. Let me just look inside this office. Aha, I don't know whose office this is. Do you reckon I just walk in?
Oh, if it's empty.
Well, there's an empty desk.
This is Africa, right? You could just kind of go.
Let's see, I'll sit
Great.
here for a bit longer, and otherwise I'm going to go in that office. Tell me if it's annoying. Sorry about this, guys.
No, it's very quiet there.
So yeah, it's quiet there.
You're just dark, that's all.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, these are all the sorts of things you've got to really, really think about. Okay. So now you say, all right, if we are going to have a compensation scheme, where's the money coming from? And let's face it, governments in Africa, I mean, some kindly group decides that compensation is the right way to go. They fund the government that compensation, and suddenly the money disappears. It doesn't get to the people for 5 years, 6 years, right? So is government the right one?
So I don't know if this is an option, but what if the government and maybe some of the other organizations come to kind of an agreement to help, you know, with the, although I don't know if maybe instead of just having one source of funding, having multiple, but then that could be where, let's say the other two sources are paying and the government's not. And so, but then at least that way they're still getting some compensation.
Well, that way you've got people policing each other. So it is a good idea to have two organizations involved for self-policing and for transparency as much as possible. But balancing on the other side, like, I mean, where I used to deal with compensations, I worked for a lodge, and the lodge was not in a protected area. So instead of going through all of the loopholes to try to gazette a protected area, because you've got to get communities involved, get documents signed and things, they basically said, okay, well, we'll ask the community in the nearby areas to look after the wildlife. That means we don't want poisoned carcasses. You know, so we had to compensate. Now, who's paying for that? The lodges, but obviously it's the guests who are paying the lodge. So they're paying a fee, and that fee is going to compensation. Did it work? Yes. We had, you know, a lot fewer carcass poisonings than anyone else in the vicinity. You know, anyone else on the edge of the park had a lot more carcass poisonings than the people we were dealing with. So in a sense, that's something that works. But how long does the lodge keep it up for? Are you going to do it now for 100 years? You're not doing anything else. So you're not working with the community to, you know, do family planning, which it comes back to, because there's too many people, and the more people are, the more livestock they need, right? You're not doing anything else except providing jobs. So where are you going to go from there?
I think it needs both education on one hand, and on the other hand, compensation, which I think for all of us, it's difficult to share the perception of so much African culture as you have. I would like to have some more Africans in this chat.
I know, I would love to, and I will get at some point, I'm hoping.
But I think it needs both.
Yeah, and I think if you were to set up, sorry, I'm just going to turn this TV off. The people have moved out of the TV room. Oh God, I hate TV. Right, let's see how long this lasts. Okay, so you've got a sort of setup where you could say to the government, all right, we'll pay compensation, but you need to set up the training schemes, right? To say, how do you build a predator-proof boma? But then the problem is, we come back to, there's not enough well-run training schemes set up, because NGOs come out, they set them up, they hand them over to government, government loses interest, now they're poorly run. So really, they need to be set up, this is a personal point of view, they need to be set up as businesses. So you need a responsible community member who's making a business out of running these training schemes. So perhaps that's the way you approach the community, as a business enterprise. So, and we're going to come to this, conservation through business enterprises, like actually training people is a scheme that can earn money. So how do you set up something where you're learning on a course, you're paying for that course, so it means something to you, or that training, and then the person actually has a business that they want to run, so they actually want to make it work. You know, and this takes business minds. And the one thing I can tell you about me is I don't have a business mind. I can think about 100 different things. To actually implement the business and have a scheme that you earn from, I'm not very good at. Hence why we've only got 8 people on this course, right? So anyone want to come in on that? Aeneas, Sharon?
No, I'm not really good at it either, so I wouldn't know how to do that. But I agree that government can be like the only one paying, because it's too many problems, and as you said, they can lose interest. And I guess that it's also really hard to apply when the government is involved. So it can take time to get a payment, and then people just won't do it. If you get a payment in 6 months, then it's useless. So
Yeah,
I think government can be a good idea, but
yeah.
it has, I think if you're working with government to get a payment, then you need someone to help people to apply like a lawyer or someone who's going to assist them in the process.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know in Botswana, when I was working there in the Okavango Delta, the waiting times for compensation was around about 18 months. And that's a country that's run on diamonds, and that is a pretty well-off country, and they still can't get it right.
Yeah, so I imagine people, they don't really count on that. So it's like, yeah, it's basically useless. They will get the money, but not when they need it.
So yeah, I mean, it comes down to this case-by-case situation. You know, is there a sort of business enterprise you could set up? You know, how can the government come involved, in which country? What about local government? Or what about setting up a governing scheme within the village elders of the community, right? Because you don't have to work off government of the country. You could set up a local government, you know, because that's also something that can work, and I have seen work for a certain amount of time. I didn't stick around to know if it is still working.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Sorry, I lost the connection, so I missed the diamond story. But like in Uganda, I think this is interesting. I think it was Bill Gates gave a pot of money to the rangers in Burundi, and it was almost like a loan situation where the rangers could borrow money from it, but only for certain things like education. And then they would feed back into it. So I thought maybe you could do something like that. It's like a small business loan where instead of using the money to just pay for livestock losses, you can use it to fund some of these small businesses to get them going, like someone who builds bomas or repairs bomas,
Yeah.
you know, someone who builds fences or whatever the case may be, something like that.
And in fact, that makes me think, you know, instead of doing it that way around, that we're paying you for each bit of livestock loss, how about you need to pay us if indeed you're lying? So if you're caught lying, you have a pot of money, that's your loan scheme, and you have the different people with their businesses in BOMA repair or checking. You've given training, and then you have your compensation. But if you go out there and you find out there's a lie, then 1/3 of that funding scheme is cut. That's pulled back into your NGO. So now there's not enough loans to go around. You know, that's maybe a way that sort of, again, you're kind of bribing in a sense, because you're saying, or blackmailing. But, you know, then there's peer pressure on the community themselves, which is self-policing. And that's what you want, because the last thing is to try to have, imagine being a manager and trying to deal with all of these things. And I can tell you it is exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. The stories you come across, things that are so outlandish, you wonder how they came up with the lie, you know?
They're used to it, you know, they've been doing it for so long. And so they can just, they're like, okay, what should we try this time? Like maybe they have tried things in the past that didn't seem to go very well. So they're like, all right, let's try this and see if it works.
But that also comes down to this thing that we've created, that everybody has to be paid to do something good in their community. And so now everybody wants money. You know, anywhere in the world where you're going to set up that system is not going to go very well.
What if something else was used other than money? What about like food or providing healthcare, or, you know, is that something that could be done?
And that has been done in terms of a clinic, you know, with supplies to say, okay, well, we have basic, you know, mosquito nets for everyone and anti-malarials, but for every year that goes past without any stock being killed, we'll, you know, put this much funding into the clinic, and you can tell us what you want it spent on.
In a successful way?
Yes, actually, that was very successful, and that was South Luangwa. It was a small village in, I can't think of the name of it now, and yeah, they did quite well with that, and they actually did it by 6-month blocks. So they said, if, you know, if there were no killings in 6 months, there'd be $10,000 put into the clinic. But if there were killings, then sorry, we can't put money into the clinic, because it obviously comes down to either there's a problem animal, which in South Luangwa is unlikely, or that someone hasn't, you know, it's exactly that. Send the kids out to get the goats in at night. You didn't manage to get your cattle or livestock in, or you crossed the boundary into the national park. And I can tell you, the head warden of Masai Mara National Park, he has a full-on business getting all of those Maasai to herd their cows into the Masai Mara so that the cows do get killed so that he can get the compensation. And it's a full-on business. All right, because we're never going to figure out an answer, we're going to have our 10-minute break, and the whole point is thinking, and then we'll come back on. So I'm actually going to, Katrina, just make you host so that I can sign off, convert the video, and come back on. Okay. All right, so let's say 10 past. Is that good for everyone?
That works.
Perfect. We will see you in 10 minutes.